Okay, so hi, everybody. If you don't hear me, raise your hand because I see you're all muted. My name is Sarina Roffe, and I'm the parent of a native cure. I was past president and past executive director of the National Acute Speech Association. My most important job is that of a parent. I also am a certified instructor of acute speech. I was a transliterator for 11 years. I am known mostly because I write and I publish on deafness and deaf education, and I present fairly frequently. So you might have seen me at an Eddie conference or Hands and Voices or someplace else, any place where there's deafness and presentations, I'm usually around. So, I was asked to talk to you a little bit about what acute speech is, and I thought I'd start with why it was developed and then talk to you a little bit about how it works and also share my personal story of cueing and how I got into it and why and how it worked for my family. So Dr. Cornett used to work at the U.S. Department of Education, and each year he would have to review Gallaudet colleges. It was college back then. He had to review their application for funding. And he was reading a report that was submitted by a staff member, and he was really surprised that deaf kids had poor reading levels. And this was back in 1965. And he had thought that deaf kids would be bookworms because they couldn't hear, they couldn't, he just thought that would be the way they learned. And he didn't understand why this was. And he thought that if deaf kids can't read, how are they getting their information? And it really bothered him. In fact, he obsessed over this. He just couldn't find a reason because there was nothing wrong with the brain. It had to do simply with the hearing. And he really became obsessed with this particular problem. So he was hired as vice president of long range planning at Gallaudet in the fall of 1965. And as part of his agreement, he was allowed to devote 1/3 of his time to research on how to improve literacy skills. And he decided that he wanted a way to convey language used for reading and writing using one hand and the mouth. He also felt that it was very important that especially for families where they lived in rural areas or families where, they might be the only child in a school district and not have access to other programs. And this is kind of what drove him. And he felt at the time, one of the things that he found is that if a child, and understand this is 1965, so what's going on in the political scene at that time, schools for the deaf were gradually changing from, they were virtually all oral before 1960, and they were gradually changing to start to use sign language. You had a lot of angry deaf people coming out of schools for the deaf because they had had their hands slapped. So the political scene at the time was, not nice. There was a lot of turbulence. There was the move towards literacy, the recognition that literacy was a big issue in deafness and deaf education was recognized, and C systems started to appear on the scene, signing exact English. But in the long run, what we've learned since then is that the C systems didn't meet the criteria for a language. They didn't convey a complete spoken language because they didn't get down to the morphologic or phonologic level. So, we've learned some things since this time period. So Dr. Cornett thought that English should be learned as a spoken language and be able to be used in daily communication with deaf children, assuming their parents were hearing. And understand, over 95% of children who were born deaf are born to hearing families. Deaf of deaf didn't have the same problem. It was deaf of hearing that had the problem with literacy. Information had to be visible on the lips, and that had to be a component of any system that he developed. And he also felt that the supporting elements had to be produced at the same rate that we talk. So he wanted that cues would be able to be used in running speech. So he developed this system. He wanted it to aid in speech and speech reading. He wanted it to require a minimal amount of time for parents to learn it. So usually you can learn cueing within about 12 hours. Some say 10, some say 15. I usually can do it in 12 hours. But you won't be fluent in that time, but you'll have learned the system and can say anything. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. The deaf child will not only know what you've said, but how to pronounce it. And everybody that comes out of my class knows that phrase. And it had to be feasible for very young, prelingually deaf children to be implemented solely through the parents. Because understand that this time period, it's actually before Public Law 94-142, which wasn't passed until 1975. And parents had to be able to communicate with their child at home. And it had to lift the level of accuracy of communication. So in this photo, you see Dr. Cornett with Mary Elsie Daisy. Mary Elsie was the mother of the first child, the test child for cueing. Her daughter was 22 months old and had literally no language, deaf, zero language. And within about 6 months, she had 450 new words. And Dr. Cornett now had a basis for which to go out and, quote, sell the system. So in 1966, he had developed this phonemically based mode of communication to make a traditionally spoken language visually accessible. And that's what we think about. We think of access to language, because as I was talking before, the average oral child was getting information from the lips and from hearing aids, but that was incomplete information because hearing aids are not corrective. Hearing aids are assistive. When you put on glasses, they are corrective, but hearing aids are not corrective. They don't provide clarity. They're not providing you with the same level that glasses would in correction. They're just making things louder. And while technology today is a little different because you're able to match and do different things with assistive devices, they're still not completely corrective. So information is missing. And with signs are not English. They're another language. And we have to recognize that ASL is a completely separate language that has its own syntax and structure. So even if a family is signing at home, first of all, hearing families are using it as a second language. They are not good models for the language. They never learn it they rarely learn it at the rate of complete fluency that you would need to model a language. And even if they did, they're modeling a language that's not the same language that the child is going to school and learning to read it. So it makes sense that a parent be able to model the language they use in the home and be able to cue and say that language at the same rate of speech that they already, that they're talking in. Now understand, cueing is a closed system. So once you learn it, you have nothing new to learn. It's like your times tables, once you memorize your times tables, it's the same thing. You're memorizing this closed system of hand shapes, placements, and mouth movements. And once you do that, there's 43 phonemes in spoken English. You have nothing new to learn. You just have to get faster. So one thing that cueing does is it disambiguates lip reading. It validates auditory skills. So let's say a child is hearing something, but they don't know what they're hearing. Does the doorbell go ding dong or ding a ling? So it reinforces those speech skills that speech pathologists might be learning. As a matter of fact, Dr. Rasmussen, who I was speaking about before from Nazareth College, just put a course online at qcollege.org for speech language pathologists on how to use cueing in the speech setting. So you might want to, your SLPs might want to look at that. But the idea was to make language clear through vision alone. And understand that while I'm talking and the auditory message comes naturally for us as hearing people, it is not necessary to the cueing system. Okay. So this is these are the hand shapes. There are 8 hand shapes that we use in cueing. And each hand shape represents 3 consonant sounds that look different on the lips. So 1, 2, and you would always hold your hand. I don't know if you can see me, if I should push out a little. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry, do I have that? Yeah. 7 and 8. Okay. So each of those sounds represents a group of consonant sounds. So this one represents hasara, and it's not the letters, it's the sounds. Okay. And then your placement, the placement, where you place your hand, you're going to place your hand in one of 4 positions: mouth position, chin position, throat position, or side position. And those positions represent groups of vowel sounds that look different on the lips. So for example, at the mouth position, you have E and Now it's the same hand cue, but my mouth is different. So that's the way, the way the system works is things that look alike on the lips will look different on the hand, and things that look alike on the hand will look different on the lips. That's why it's really an ingenious system, and like you get it, and you're like, oh, that makes so much sense. So let's talk for a second about how language develops in hearing children and how they learn to read. Okay, hearing children, they babble, right? They're hearing things that are going on in the background. They're babbling. They start to express themselves by babbling. They have one word, then they put 2 words together, and they have these milestones that develop. And as you go on, you have intercourse. You have this exchange of language between parent and child, or between adult and a child, or between children. Because they're talking, they're using the language that they've learned. They've internalized that language. They understand subject-verb agreement. They understand idiomatic expression. They understand syntax. They know that it's we were and I was, not I were. They understand the subject-verb agreement and how things work within the language. So when they go to school and they are first learning to read and first learning target words, they already know the language they're learning to read in. It's not a different language. Whereas the signers don't know the language. So it's like, it's they've learned this language with this syntax, and then they go to school and they're expected to the first time they see English is the written word. Now, we as hearing people don't quite get that concept. We think if we're signing milk, right, that means MILK, but the deaf child doesn't think that. If ASL is their first language, they're looking at the sign for milk, and they're thinking about a white liquid that tastes good that you pour on cereal or you drink with a chocolate chip cookie. Okay, they're not thinking of the phonemes that go into that word. Understand? So by cueing it home in the language learning years, the child is internalizing the spoken language, is understanding the syntax, is understanding the idiomatic expression, is understanding and internalizing subject-verb agreement and how to put a sentence together. And when they go to learn to read in school, they are like the hearing child who already knows the language, because they know the language before they ever get to the written task. So what happens is that these children, with only the addition of cueing in their lives, have the same path to literacy as a regular hearing child. And it's like a wild concept, but that is the basic concept to cueing and what makes it so important to literacy. And the average cueing child will have at or above grade level reading, absolutely without fail. I'm going to tell you my story and how I know that to be true. So hearing parents will use cued speech. And actually today, I really shouldn't even be using the word speech. Cued speech is the system. We use it in a cued language. And in the United States, we use cued American English. So if you see those phrases, understand it's just a different application. They use parents use it to provide visual access to the language of the home. And they can learn to communicate and develop fluency within just a few months to a year. My family, we are Jewish. I worried that my child wouldn't be able to have a bar mitzvah. How was he going to learn Hebrew? My grandparents were born in were Arabic speaking. While I don't speak Arabic, my family's from the Middle East. We still have expressions, traditions, heritage that have passed down through the years. And because I can cue, I can say the names of the foods, the expressions, things like that are in Arabic that my parents said to me, and I can say them to my children and to my grandchildren, and I can cue them. And in that way, I'm passing on my heritage. And I think that's important, that families not only have communication, but are able to pass on their heritage, their traditions, their religion, without being impeded in any way. So I think I said this already. The first step to literacy is learning the language. I think sometimes I get ahead of myself on these slides. And they have to have repetition, consistency, frequency. Children do not learn a language just through print. They have to know the language, internalize the language, use the language before they ever get to print. Children of deaf parents also use cueing because they're learning English as a second visual language, and cueing enables them to manipulate the phoneme stream of English and develop phonemic awareness of the language they will learn to read and write. What we learned is that there are deaf parents who came out of schools for the deaf who realized they didn't have the English that they needed or the skills that they needed, and wanted their own deaf children to have better opportunities, and recognized early on that cueing would provide that. So they would send their children to a school where there was cueing while they still signed at home. And that's fine too. You know, we so many different ways to use the system. It's kind of amazing. So kids learn many languages. They take, other languages when they're in junior high and high school. They learn accents. My deaf son can tell you the difference when a person who's cueing in from South Carolina or Louisiana from a person who lives in Boston and has a Boston accent. They know the difference, and they can identify where that person is from because you cue the way you talk. So if you say park the car or park the car, right? It's the way you cueing the way you say it. Okay, you're not cueing the way you spell it. You're cueing the way you say it. I can correct pronunciation. And cue kids also, because they're internalizing the language, they see the cues. So let's say they haven't learned the cuss sound. So when that speech language pathologist is going to teach that sound, understand that child already is internalizing. He knows where it goes in the word, but maybe he can't say that particular sound. When they learn it, it goes right into their expressive speech. It's really quite interesting how that works. These kids learn English vocabulary. They learn multiple meaning words, synonyms, pronouns, contractions, modalities, idioms. They learn also how words blend together when we talk. So for example, we don't say it's a, we say it's a, right? We run the words together. When a word ends in a consonant and then the next word starts in a vowel, right? So you usually run those words together without even realizing you're doing it, you do it. So some questions that I often hear: does cueing require hearing? Of course not. If we did, we wouldn't need transliterators. In fact, when Dr. Cornett was inventing cueing, he was inventing it for the most profoundly deaf child. And to this day, those are the children for which it is most effective, because those are the children who need the visual access the most and who are most dependent on the visual on the visual message. But we see it used in hard of hearing kids. We see it used in kids with communication disorders. We see it used in mildly autistic kids. We see it used in so many different ways today by SLPs or teachers who are looking for creative ways to work with their students. Cueing also validates what the child is hearing through their assistive listening devices, and it provides a visual model of the target sound during auditory training. So for example, the bee, a bee is in the room. Bzzz. Okay, there are environmental sounds that you can convey through cueing. So in 1989, there was a major study done of kids who were deaf and hard and severe and profoundly deaf. And Jean Wandel did this study by comparing students who were oral, total communication, and cuers. This was a study done at Columbia University. And by the way, to this day, Columbia University requires all of its teachers of the deaf to take a cueing class. So what she did was they had a control group of 30 hearing kids, and then they had oral kids, total communication kids, and cue kids, 30 in each group. And of the 30, 15 were severely deaf and 15 were profoundly deaf. And they all had to be using the mode of communication for a minimum of 3 years. Okay. And she really carefully matched the kids and found that the oral kids, and that's what we called it back when the study was done. So I know it's LSL today. That she found that they scored significantly lower, and the cue kids matched the hearing kids in terms of their reading achievement. So let me just stop here and tell you a little bit about my own story. My son was born profoundly deaf. He was born in 1975. And at that time, the average age of diagnosis was 2.5. We were very lucky, and he was diagnosed and aided at 8 months. And he was Public Law 94-142, known today as the IDEA, had just passed. Our school district was really one of the best in the country in terms of early intervention and for deaf and hard of hearing kids. I lived in Montgomery County, Maryland at the time. And so Simon was immediately placed in a program, and it was a really, it was a great program. In fact, his teacher was Dr. Sue Schwartz, who she wrote a book that included stories from all modalities from parents. But after about a year and a half, he had no language. I mean, he still had nothing. And I was killing myself. I had signed up for the John Tracy Clinic correspondence course in California. And she was a traditional oralist, and she said to me, Sarina, I think you need to consider sign language because he's not going anywhere and you need a way to communicate with your child. And coming from her, that was a huge message. So my husband and I, we listened to the teacher and we went to sign classes and we came home and we started to sign. And it did relieve a lot of the tension in the house. It relieved a lot of his frustration, a lot of our frustration. But I saw over time that what I was doing was, I call it dumbing down, but it was simplifying the language that I was using because I wanted to be able to communicate with him. And that was the easiest way. So instead of saying, do you want frosted flakes, Rice Krispies, or cornflakes for breakfast, I would go to the cereal boxes, I would show them to him, and I would say which one. Okay. That's not building language. That's an easy, simple way to gesture to communicate with your child, but it's not providing the language that allows them to grow. And I didn't know it at the time, because in the first 3 years after after a child's been diagnosed, for 3 years, and I say it takes that long, parents go through a grief period. And it's very, very difficult for them to understand what's going on. They think they're okay, but it takes a while before you can look beyond tomorrow to what's going on down the road. And that happened to me. And I went to a summer session at John Tracy Clinic. I stayed there for 6 weeks. And they require you as part of the program to meet with a psychologist in group session every day. And those group sessions help to move me past the grief. And that's when I started to question what I was doing, started to look to tomorrow, to the future. And I started to understand that he wasn't making progress. We still had trouble communicating. How is he going to have a bar mitzvah? How is he going to learn Hebrew? How is he going to become a member of our faith? How am I going to convey my culture, my Middle Eastern culture? And then beyond that, if he's always has this separate education, how is he going to go to college? How is he going to get those skills? And then I volunteered at a preschool. I put him in a preschool half a day and in the preschool, I volunteered one day and a kid came up to me and he said, his 2-year-old twit says to me, my dog pants when he's sweating. Oh my God, my kid could never put together a sentence like that. And I would see him at the corner of the playground playing by himself, and my heart broke. He could not communicate. At the end of 3 years in early intervention, he was aided. He was in a program. I killed myself to talk to him, to develop auditory training, to do everything I was supposed to do as a parent. I went to bed at night guilty. I didn't do enough. At the end of 3 years, Simon had the language of a 17-month-old, 150-word vocabulary. So he had made 6 months progress a year for 3 years. And that's when I learned about cueing. When I learned about cueing, it was just before he was to go into preschool. He was 3.5. He had aged out of early intervention. And what happened in my county was we were lucky. We were right outside of DC where Dr. Cornett was. And he had an experimental program where all of the teachers in the school learned to cue, hearing teachers, hearing classes. And deaf kids would go into those classes and the teachers would cue. It was an experimental program called National Child Research Center. It's still open today. And 3 kids from that program were aging out and coming back to the county. And 2 of the parents said, we want a cute speech program in our county. And the county said, well, we have total communication and we have oral. Those are your choices. And they said, test our children. The 2 kids were age 4. One of them, a 4-year-old girl, tested out as at age appropriate, and she had a learning disability. The second child, the boy, tested out as a 7-year-old for language. And the county said something's right with those kids. They never had a kid who tested age appropriate, never. So they said, we'll give you cute speech services. And she said, no. The parents said, no, we don't want just services for our kids. We want every kid in the county to have access to this program. So they waited a year, they gave them a year, and a year later, the program started. And that was the year I was lucky enough that the program started. And I went to a workshop at Gallaudet with Dr. Cornett, and in a day, it made sense to me. It just clicked. We started to cue, and slowly, but within about 3 months, I would say I was fluent because I was very dedicated to learning it. He started to absorb language. He right away made the transition for the 150 words that he knew. And I started to see it click in his mind. He was processing the language, and gradually the language grew. And within 6 months, he had 500 new words. I couldn't believe it. Within a year, he was talking in sentences. And within 2 years, he had made a 5-year leap in language. By age 5.5, he tested as a 6-year-old for language. It was an amazing transformation. It was like a miracle happened in front of my eyes. And if I didn't see it myself, I never would have believed it. Our house totally normalized. He knew what we were talking about. I could discipline him. I could say the words of the cereal boxes. It didn't matter. I could say anything that I wanted. And that's what Cute Speech did for thousands of families around the world. Back to my presentation. And I'm open for questions after. So we know that the research shows that cute kids have developed phonological skills. They have a causal link between phonologic tasks and reading developments. They know how to rhyme. And this, they're comparable phonological skills with hearing children. We know that deaf cuers as adults do not rely solely on interpretation. They have excellent lip reading skills. They learn English naturally. They learn foreign languages as naturally as hearing children. They have an accurate phonological model of the spoken language. They have a large vocabulary base. In fact, when I was teaching my son language at the very beginning, I had to repeat things over and over and over and over again. And I gradually, with cueing, I just had to show him the word once. Cue it once, and it was done. They have English that matches the same level as their hearing peers, and they can learn to read as easily as their hearing peers do. It provides visual access to the phonemic base of the language. Cuers know target sounds for words, and they can learn to listen to the language they already know. A lot of people ask me about cueing and cochlear implants. We call them powerful partners because if a child is cueing, they're much more successful with their implants. When the implants are broken or their processor is broken, the cueing provides a great backup system for them. And they've demonstrated already that they have more advanced syntax and language. It's more complex than other children. So I'd like to just demonstrate and have you cue with me, and which is just a simple lesson so that you'll be able to at least see it a little bit. There is a chart that you can download from the cutespeech.org website, and that we'll show you the entire system in one chart, but let's do this together. First of all, know that your hand is always going to be facing like this, your fingers together. You want your hand to be flat. Know there is a hand shape for no consonant, this, which is this, and there's a placement for no vowel. You want to synchronize your mouth to the cue, and you always want to cue in a CV or VC pair. So we're going to cue the word. So this is the hand shape for the sound for M, F, and T, mf, and t. Okay. So you're going to place your hand shape. This is hand shape 5. You're going to place it at your throat. At the throat, it's the ah sound. Okay. So this is ma. Now you're going to take it and go to the side. And you're not going to go very far to the side. You're going to go like this length. You're going to go mat. Now you've said the word mat. So you're going from the throat to the side. Mat. Okay, and you have to say it. If you don't say it, it doesn't count because the lip movement is part of the hand cue. So let's see you do that again. Mat. Okay, and you want to synchronize. So here it's the M, ma, and here it's the t, mat. Okay. All right. Now you're going to change the phoneme. We're going to rhyme words that rhyme. Okay. So this is mat. This is fat. It's the same hand cue, but my lips are different. Okay. And this is tat and at. So all 4 of those words are cued the same, but their lips are different. Okay. Watch when I cue them without my mouth, without sound. So you can see that my lips are different, even though the hand cue is the same. Okay. Okay. So again, this is the same chart that I showed you before. And the vowel sounds are E and the throat position, it's I, a, like big bad wolf. U, a, and the side position is O and ah and And we have 4 diphthongs in English. I, ow, a, and oi. So let's start with this one, hasara, okay? So we're rhyming, okay? So it's hat. So now you're going from one hand shape to another hand shape. You're starting with this hand shape 3 at the throat, thumb down, right, right, hat. And you're opening to hand shape 5, right? Again, hat. Okay, now let's do sat. It's the same hand shape. Sat. And then rat. Rat. So you see, deaf kids can rhyme. Hat, sat, rat. Now make more words that rhyme with mat. So now you have, so this is the pa, da. So the pat, dat. This is the ba and the sound. Hand shape 4, bat, nat. This is the kava, the cat, that. And this is chat. So you see how it varies and how easily it is to go from one thing to another. And of course, you know, if I cue to my son, I'm cueing in running speech. I'm cueing at the same rate that I talk. So if you want to cue a phrase, pat, mat. Okay, if you want to do it with me, pat, sat. Right, this was your pa, this is your pat, sat, And you're only going out to the side because you have final consonant. Final consonant is always on the side. Okay. That, nat, sat. Okay. So if you go to CSChawaii.org, they have a free demonstration course that way you can learn how to cue. They also have an online course, and then they have courses where you're actually with an instructor. So all of that is available on CSChawaii.org. It's a separate website. Some resources for you. Obviously, CuteSpeech.org, the NCSA website, they have monthly webinars. They also have what they call the Deaf Children's Literacy Project. They have these, a parent of a newly identified child can sign up for parent kits, and there'll be 4 kits. They come every 3 months in a box with a prize toy for your child. And they also have these Cue With Me kits that are child-oriented, where you can, has games and different ways to teach kids expressive cueing. And those are available actually on the CueCollege website, the Cue store at CueCollege.org. Also, the NCSA has regional directors. So you can reach out to the regional director in your region. And there's a wonderful website called dailycues.com that has games, events, information, links, lots of good stuff out there. And I would also go to YouTube. I would tell my parents to go to YouTube and search Cute Speech. There's plenty of great videos out there. This book is a little old at this point. It's 12 years old, but it's a great book on, but it's more of a, it's not parent story. We hope to release the book next year with parent stories, but this is more of the mindset of what cueing and cued language does for deaf and hard of hearing children. It's written by, Jacqueline Lebert is from Belgium. She's a prominent researcher in the field of cueing. Kelly Crane and Carol Lasasso, who was a professor at Gallaudet. I think she's retired now. And you can also get information packets, a free 1-year membership. Those parent kits include a free 1-year membership and a link to a free online course to learn how to cue. And they also have a scholarship program, and they're basically the national advocacy organization for all things cueing. And that's it.